Hey y'all, this is Sean again, and today we're coming back to our Intro to Plumbing series, and we're going to talk about flexible tubing. All right, so today we're going to talk about two specific types of flexible tubing that we use the most often. There's a lot of different types out there, but for our applications, we typically use a vinyl tube like this here, or a poly tubing like this here. The poly in particular is really common. You see it in hardware stores all the time. It's used for a variety of things from field irrigation to a lot of different things. So in general, you'll just be using these anywhere where you're wanting to have some flexibility in what you're doing. So you're not using as opposed to a hard pipe like a PVC where you need to have specific fittings to kind of direct it where you want to go. This stuff is a little more flexible. It can be sort of left loose. So if we need that flexibility, this is a good thing to use. In addition, with the poly specifically, we use it all the time for using drip emitters. So that's kind of the main thing that we use the poly for. And later on we'll show you some examples of where these are located within our farm in particular. So the main differences between these two, in a lot of applications they can be used interchangeably. It's not too much of a difference. In general, the vinyl is going to cost you a little bit more, and the poly is going to be pretty inexpensive, so it's really handy to use in that regard. Kind of the biggest difference for us is when we're using any lines where we're putting drip emitters, we're always using poly. And then anywhere where in our particular application, we use a lot of these quick connect fittings, and we're connecting sort of a piece like this to another piece, and the flexibility and durability is really important. In those applications, we like to use this vinyl. Other than that, I'm sure there's some pressure differences and things like that, but for the type of low pressures that we use, that's not really a huge consideration. They both can come in a potable version, so that's fine. But yeah, so really the main difference is when we're using it is when we're using drip emitters, we're using this. And most of our other applications for kind of main feed lines and stuff throughout our system are going to be the vinyl tubing. The types of fittings that you'll be using primarily with these types of tubing are going to be barbed fittings like this. So these come in, you can get them in valves, you can get straight connection fittings, T's, elbows, pretty much all of your standard fittings that you can find in PVC configurations as well. So here's an example of a 1-inch barbed T. So you see there's just these ridges here. When that inserts into the pipe, those ridges kind of pull back, and that's what sort of locks the fitting into place. So you want to make sure when you're sourcing your fittings that they are fitting properly with whichever type of tubing you're using. So you should get a nice snug fit. It doesn't need to be super snug, because then it makes it hard to get the fitting in. But just a nice tight fit is what you're looking for. And then to kind of secure the hose onto the fitting itself, most of the time you'll see these types of hose clamps. I've called them a worm drive hose clamp. There's a number of other names for them. That's how I know it. But these are usually stainless steel, fairly costly. So in low flow applications, if your tubing fits nice and snug, you don't always need to use one of these. But if there's any pressure that you're doing, so if you're kind of close to wherever your pump is and water's coming out of there and it's under fairly good pressure, it's a good idea to just go ahead and put this over the tubing, cinch it down, and it'll keep it leak free and won't allow it to pop off very easily. So these are the most common. There are other types of hose clamps out there. There are kind of some pinch style and different things like that, but these are definitely the most available probably, and they cover a wide size range, so you can get kind of one clamp and they can tighten down to a pretty small range or a larger range. So they're a nice option to use. So one thing to note when you are kind of putting together your project and you're getting your tubing, you're getting your fittings, most of these types of tubings come in fairly standard sizes. So with the poly, what you'll mostly see is the smaller kind of spaghetti tube or the 1/4 inch size. That's going to be your standard size for most of the things you're using on the ends of drip emitters and things like that. So that's a super common size. And then up from there, you'll see 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, 1 inch, and then it goes larger, but for most of our applications, we're kind of using 1/2 and 3/4 inch and sometimes the 1/4 inch tubing. The same goes for the vinyl. We pretty much use 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, and 1 inch. Those are some of the standard sizes. So keep that in mind and source the fittings accordingly. So you'll see the same thing, 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, 1 inch fittings, which should match up pretty well with your tubing. There are, you will notice at times there are different, basically the way they measure the tubing can be a little bit funky between types here. So like you might source a fitting that fits just perfectly in your poly tubing of a 3/4 inch size, but when you switch over to 3/4 inch vinyl, it might be slightly looser or slightly tighter, depending, most of the time that depends on the wall thickness of the tubing. And so just something to keep an eye out of. Just when you're putting together your project, make sure the things fit nicely. Okay, so the next thing we'll cover is just kind of some general tools that you'll be using to work with this type of tubing. So really there's not a whole lot. The main thing is a cutter. So this is a flexible tubing cutter. It can cut some smaller PVC. It's not the best thing to use for that, so I wouldn't recommend it, but for poly tubing and vinyl tubing, it works great. It's just a blade, it clamps down and cuts. What you'll want to do when you cut it though is kind of give it a little twist. You don't want to just like cram it on there and try to snap it through, because it'll just bend the pipe and it'll degrade your tool faster. So if you put this on here and give it some pressure and then just rotate it slightly, it'll make a nice smooth straight cut for you. And the same goes for the vinyl. You'll just give it a nice little bit of pressure, a little bit of a turn, and it'll cut really effortlessly. So that's kind of your main tool when you're cutting things to length. That's a really handy thing to use. They're super inexpensive. You can get them any hardware store really. So that's the main thing. And then like we talked about in the previous video on drip emitters, the other tool that you'll be using pretty regularly probably is with the vinyl tubing is the hole punch. So we went over this before, but this is just a tool that's gonna put a small little hole that's sized appropriately for the drip emitters you'll be using. So those are kind of the two most common tools that you'll see. So another thing to note with the fittings and using it with this type of tubing is there's no cement, no glue required. So this is just simply sliding into the tube and then, like I said, anchoring down with a hose clamp if necessary. But a lot of times there are applications where you don't need anything. It's just gonna slide on, it's gonna fit really nice, and it's gonna be snug. The one thing that I have had to do at times is if you've got a really tight fitting tube for your fitting, is you might need to get some kind of lubrication on the inside of, or the inside of the tubing or the outside of the fitting that helps you slide it over. So, I mean, I've used like dish soap or something like that, just a really small amount to just give you some lubrication to slide it on. So before we sign off today, we just wanted to show you a few examples of these types of flexible tubing in our farm here. So I'm back over here by our IBC tank, our main plumbing system. So you'll see here there's some 1-inch vinyl tubing. As you can see, this is just kind of a flexible piece. It's not kinking or anything, so it's nice to have some flexibility there to connect into our main feed line. And so since this is coming directly from our pump, and this is like all the water coming through here to be distributed throughout our system, here's an example of where I definitely want to use one of these hose clamps here. So it's tightened down nicely onto that barbed fitting, and it's very secure, leak-free, and really easy to use. So that's a good spot to show that. So this is going up into our main feed lines that are going to go to all of our racks in our system. And so we go up, and then we've got additional lengths of 3/4 inch vinyl tubing that run the whole length of our rack here. And then those branch off with teed fittings to these 1/2 inch lines, also vinyl, that come down, and these connect to each of our individual racks. So right here we've got a quick connect fitting, so we can quickly remove the water supply to this rack if we need to. But otherwise, you know, this is an area where we like to use this vinyl because it's nice and flexible. It doesn't kink easily. It's getting moved around a lot, so it's really durable, and just a good application for that. But it's running up into our rack, and it's connecting by barb fittings, like we showed earlier, into a piece of the poly tubing that's running along the top of our gutter there, which is where our drip emitters are installed. So just wanted to take a quick second to show you kind of those couple of applications. That's how we use it in our system. So yeah, again, if you've got any examples of how you use this stuff in your system, we'd love to hear from you. All right, thanks for watching today. Hopefully this video on flexible tubing gave you some good, helpful information. If you've got any examples of how you've been using these types of tubings in your systems, we'd love to hear about it. And in addition, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave those here as well. So again, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.